Hello, everybody. Hello. I'm Betsy Jacks, Executive Director of the Thomas Cole National Historic Site, and I am so thrilled to welcome you here to the 2024 Sunday Salons. Can everyone hear me okay? Too much? It seems loud. But they turn it up because my voice is soft. So we have been doing these lectures now for 20 years, and they are known for bringing scholarship into the present and talking about things that are really highly relevant to our own times, and that's definitely what we're going to have today. So I will give you, before we launch into today's wonderful speaker, I will give you a couple of the dates coming up as well. So our salon after this will be on March 24th, and this is a group from the RPI architectural program, and their students last year used the Thomas Cole site as their inspiration, and they all came up with different ways to transform this site. Build a building into the hill, build a tower in the middle. I mean, there's just the most unbelievable things, and they're calling it architectural interventions. So that one's going to be fascinating. If you've ever wondered what it's like to be in architecture school, and I have, then come to that. And then after that, Sunday, April 14th, we will have our Cole Fellows giving their research presentations. And they're here today. Raise your hands if I can put you on the spot, Cole Fellows. So then on May 4th, we're going to open up our huge exhibition for the year, Native Prospects, curated by Dr. Scott Manning Stevens. And it will have in this room a combination of Thomas Cole's paintings and indigenous contemporary artist paintings and works of art, and as well as objects from historic indigenous culture and artifacts. And it's just going to be magical. I'm very excited. So, and I'd like to note that today we are gathering on the ancestral homelands of the Mohican, the people of the waters that are never still, the indigenous peoples of this land. Today, their community lives in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Muncie community. So today, we have a truly exceptional opportunity. People came up to me and they said, "How did you get Patricia?" Patricia Norby, PhD, is Purépecha and the first full-time curator of Native American art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So it's really momentous. This is in their 153-year history. She previously served as senior executive and assistant director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian in New York. I urge you all to run out and go there if you haven't already. It's an amazing experience. And as director of the Darcy McNichol Center for American Indian and Indigenous Studies at the Newberry in Chicago. A former trustee of the Field Museum in Chicago, another favorite place of mine. She served on the deaccession committee and co-advised on repatriation cases. Her curatorial vision and exhibition strategies, which emphasize community collaboration and foreground Native American and Indigenous perspectives at the Met, have been written up all over the place. New York Times, The New Yorker, Wall Street Journal, Hyperallergic, NPR, Forbes, etc., described as provocative, poetic, and a new voice in an old institution. So she was recently elected a new member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and her specialty, her scholarly work and research examines 20th century Native American art in a context with environmental conflicts in northern New Mexico. So she, at lunch, was telling us about how she is leading up collecting a missing chunk of the collection at the Met, which is really 20th century indigenous art. So please welcome our very, very special guest, Patricia Norby.
Thank you, Betsy. I don't usually get nervous before talk until I start hearing the introduction, and then I always have this moment like, are they really talking about me? Is that really? Like, but thank you for your introduction. But I also want to thank you and your team for being such amazing hosts and making today so special. I've just been having a really great day, so thank you. Thank you everyone for being here and for your interest in what we're doing at the Met. Nadi Hamashak, hello, I'm Patricia Marroquin Norby. I'm Associate Curator of Native American Art at the Met. And I would like to acknowledge that as a woman of Purépecha descent, I'm a guest here in the homelands of the Mohican, and I would add Haudenosaunee communities as well. And to other indigenous peoples and communities, both past and present, who call this place home, I offer my gratitude and respect. Again, thank you to Betsy and her team, and just, it's been a special day. I've had a tour, we've driven around Hudson and Catskill, and we went to lunch, and it's such a special place here. So this is a wonderful place. So I'm going to share about Truman Lowe. Truman Lowe is the premier Ho-Chunk sculptor in the United States. He passed on in 2019, and his work will be in the exhibition that will be opening in May that Betsy just mentioned. So here we go. On September 15, 2023, a large group gathered atop a hill on the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus to honor the renowned Ho-Chunk sculptor Truman Lowe and welcome home Lowe's 1997 sculpture, Effigy Bird Form. Created in 1997, the airy form, which replicated other local effigy mounds of the region, was made from solid welded polished aluminum rods and measured 42 feet high by approximately 20 feet wide and approximately 11 feet in length, and was fabricated by the Hooper Corporation in Madison, Wisconsin. It was a day of community and celebration that included drumming, singing, dancing, and feasting, as well as a lineup of speakers who shared meaningful stories about Lowe's legacy as the premier Ho-Chunk artist in the United States and his numerous contributions as a Ho-Chunk community member, father, teacher, colleague, and friend. Lowe had not only been a student of the University of Wisconsin system, he had taught at the UW-Madison campus for close to 30 years, and for part of that time also served as curator of contemporary art at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, where he helped to open the museum on the National Mall. On that day, there was a tangible warmth among the many people who gathered, who had known Truman, and who embraced the artist as one of their own. Effigy Bird Form was originally exhibited in the Jacqueline Kennedy Garden at the White House in Washington, D.C., and included in a celebration of 20th century American sculpture, which highlighted 12 works by contemporary Native American artists and was an art program led by Hillary Clinton. According to the art historian Joe Ortel, Lowe's bird form was inspired by ceremonial effigy mounds found in the upper Midwest and throughout the Great Lakes region. In Lowe's 2004 biography, he told Ortel, "Being from the woodlands, I wanted my inspiration to come from a culture that inhabited this area and left its mark with earth and mounds, a unique way of showing respect and living with the earth. This is my attempt to pay my respects." In his work, Lowe expressed a personal and cultural connection with the effigy and other mounds of the region. And over the course of his career, he made many sculptures, installations, and drawings that paid homage to the human-made earthworks. And in her biography on Lowe's work, Joe Ortel talks about how Truman was particularly drawn to mounds that were shaped like birds. Effigy Bird Form very elegantly embodies elements of the earth, water, and sky, and significantly is directionally positioned toward a significant effigy mound grouping just 3 miles northwest of its location at what is now known as the Black Hawk Country Club and Golf Course. So this is a map of the Black Hawk Country Club and Golf Course, and On this, you can see the mounds are marked in green. There are 9 of them that are still extant. And there are 3 bears, which you can see toward the top right, 3 conical, which are at the bottom left, and then 2 elongated and 1 flying bird. Remarkably, the bird faces directionally south toward the Effigy Mounds State Park in Iowa. And the Effigy Mounds State Park is located where Wisconsin, Illinois, and Iowa meet, and where 2 significant Midwestern rivers converge, the Mississippi and the Wisconsin rivers. And where water converges, the sites where water converges is particularly important, significant to Ho-Chunk as well as other indigenous communities. So here's some shots of the mound, some of the mounds in the golf course, what is now a golf course. And I went out there with a Ho-Chunk elder and Joe Ortel, and we ran around this golf course that afternoon. It was the day after the celebration that I just shared about, and it was very adventurous. We snuck onto the golf course, and every time there were golf carts with, people and maintenance people, we'd be ducking behind trees and then taking pictures of the mounds, because it's now private property. The mounds are not open to the public, so you do have to sneak on there or get permission to visit the mounds. And I should mention that the golf course opened in the early 1920s. I think it was 1921, and it was modeled after a specific golf course in Scotland. And so I mentioned earlier that there is one mound that is shaped like a bird, which was on the map. And this mound, there are still remnants of it that are still there, but part of the head was plowed to make way for the golf course. But you can still visit the rest of the mound, and this is the mound that faces to the south in the direction of the National Mounds State Park. So all of these directions, Truman Lowe's sculpture facing this mound grouping, and then this mound facing to the south where the National Mounds Park is, are all very important, and they're intentional. One reason that it's important that where Truman's mound, his bird effigy faces toward the mound grouping on the golf course is that just a 6-minute walk from this area is the site of a sacred spring to the Ho-Chunk people. So the Ho-Chunk people refer to it as their medicine spring, and it has another name that I'm not going to share because then people will try to go and look for it, but there is an English name for it. This spring is significant in that it is, there is red willow that grows. The roots of the willow grow into the spring, and the spring percolates up out of the earth, as a natural spring would do. And then the red roots cause the water to look red. And then, as you can see, the spring waters then converge into Lake Mendota. And Lake Mendota is surrounded, the entire lake, which is adjacent to the University of Wisconsin campus, is surrounded by other mounds that were built by the ancestors of the Ho-Chunk people. And I think we have you can hear the boats. Truman's art is deeply personal and grounded by his love for his family, community, and his love for land, water, and the skies of his ancestral homelands, which now surround effigy bird form. The elegance and refined presentation of materials, Lowe's aesthetic language, and his engagement of the natural landscape and surroundings are often intentionally in dialogue with his works. and this exchange resonates with visitors from diverse backgrounds from all over the world. Deceptively simple, Lowe's work actually demands complex thought from his audiences. He asks us to appreciate the graceful curve of a bird's wing and encourages us to consider his thoughtful framing of positive and negative space. He invites us to pause on his play of dappled light and elongated shadows, but he never tells his audiences what to do. Instead, in his thoughtful approach, he guides his viewers along with the hope that we will activate our own imaginations and honor the truest, most streamlined form of our original selves as humans who were brought to this earth to simply love this place and our natural surroundings. So now I'm going to talk about Truman's work in our 2002-2003 exhibition, Water Memories at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. In 2021, I had the honor of acquiring one of Truman's original works, Feather Canoe, from 1993 for the Met's Native American collection. As a new curator, Feather Canoe was my first official acquisition for the museum, and I was thrilled to welcome Truman's art to the Met, a world-class institution with an international platform with annual visitors numbering in the millions. As the premier Ho-Chunk sculptor in the US, Truman's work brought great meaning to the Met's collection, and as an Indigenous curator, it was an honor to foreground the art and aesthetic expressions of Native American art and Indigenous artists. And Truman was my professor from 1999 to 2003, and later my professional mentor as I was first navigating the museum world. So I should mention that Truman was the person who actually brought me to the National Museum of the American Indian the first time that I worked for NMAI, and I was his intern. So that's how my museum career began. He helped ignite my museum career and my love for museums, which has now lasted over 20 years. So welcoming his work to the Met was especially moving for me. Feather Canoe became the centerpiece for the Met's exhibition Water Memories, which highlighted Indigenous people's personal reflections and stories associated with water. Feather Canoe is created with bent willow, copper wire, and white feathers. The work holds an ethereal presence, and much like effigy bird form, it too combines elements of earth, water, and sky. Feather Canoe is a magical work. It's such a magical work that we built the rest of the exhibition around it. In fact, there were some truly incredible moments that happened as we installed the canoe. I had originally envisioned Feather Canoe open and atop a platform or a base, so audiences could engage with it in the round. But our exhibition designer had disappointing news. Not only could the canoe not be in the open because of its delicate branches, which visitors would surely be drawn to touching, but we had to show it in a plexiglass case to protect it from environmental elements. I remember feeling heartbroken that my vision for the canoe was not going to happen, but then something truly remarkable occurred that has always led me to believe that Truman had his own ideas for how the canoe should be shown at the Met. When we installed the canoe in the clear plexi case, we decided to suspend it from the ceiling with special lighting that gave the canoe the appearance of gently floating. As we finished securing the work, we suddenly realized that the lighting and the smooth reflective surface of the plexiglass case created a magical mirrored effect that presented the canoe from every possible angle, not just once, but an infinity of reflections. So when audiences stood under the canoe, they could see it flying from below, from above, from the stern, from the bow, and from the hull. True to Truman's aesthetic, it was a breathtaking moment of light, shadows, and reflection. And throughout the run of the show, audiences were captivated by the streamlined elegance of Truman's canoe, which embodied his memories of floating along in a canoe on the Black River in Wisconsin. Viewers would stand under it, gazing at the canoe's infinite reflections for extended periods of time. And the canoe took on its own life and became a featured highlight in articles in the New York Times and other high-profile reviews of the exhibition. Among the artist's material preferences are locally harvested then peeled willow saplings, stripped ash, copper wire, and feathers. These intentionally regional selections evoke Lowe's respect for intergenerational and ecological histories. Secured willow saplings were regularly used by Great Plains and Plains Indian communities to create the inner frames for medicinal and other lodges for ceremonies and shelter. Copper is considered medicinal and sacred by many indigenous peoples throughout the entire Western Hemisphere and was traded extensively across North America. Narrow wooden strips of milled pine materially signal Lowe's childhood growing up among the white and jack pine forests of central Wisconsin, as well as Ho-Chunk creative and cultural practices, specifically the seasonal production of splint-plated black ash baskets. Lowe's parents were basket makers. His mother wove baskets out of hand-dyed and then shaved wooden strips of black ash. Lowe's father harvested the black ash and carved the wooden handles for her baskets. Winter was spent making baskets among his family members, and summer was for ceremony, dancing, and camping along with other Ho-Chunk families on the Wisconsin River. Strongly present as a sovereign nation throughout the Midwest, the Ho-Chunk held homelands once spanning the states that we now know as Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, where very much like here, the terrain is lush and steep and linked by a network of rivers, streams, and lakes, a meandering natural environment known as the driftless region by ecologists. Thousands of years ago in the Midwest, glacial advancement carved the hills, rocky bluffs, river gorges, and rushing waterfalls of the region into a dreamlike landscape that cradles effigy mounds, natural springs, and thick forests, many natural spaces that are recognized as sacred sites to the Ho-Chunk people. So this is the way that the feather canoe was installed. As I mentioned, it was suspended from the ceiling in this plexi case. And although you can't see it as well, you could see, when you stood under it, you could see into the hull. And then from when you looked at either side, you could see the canoe, like an infinity of canoes. So it looked as if the canoe was moving, it was floating throughout or toward the other gallery spaces in the exhibition. So it was really quite beautiful. And then we installed it with the cyanotypes of Henry Bosse. And Henry Bosse was a German-American cartographer and photographer. And during the 1880s, he was hired by the U.S. Conservation Corps to document the Mississippi River throughout the Midwest before it was permanently altered by dams and levees and other construction. And instead of just creating a map of the river, Henry Bosse decided to document it photographically using the cyanotype process and using large glass plates. So he spent nearly 10 years making approximately 400 cyanotype prints of the original path of the Mississippi River. Remarkably, what he didn't realize, he was also documenting visually the original homelands of the Ho-Chunk people before it was permanently altered. And this was a place where the Ho-Chunk people had been forcibly removed over 13 times, and often by gunpoint by the US military. And they kept returning back to their original homelands. So as you can see, all of these interconnections and welcoming the bird effigy or bird form back to Wisconsin from its journey to DC was this really special moment. This is a close-up of one of Henry Bosse's cyanotypes. This one is from bluffs at Trumpelow, Wisconsin, looking upstream from 1885. And as I mentioned, I think he worked from 1883 to 1893 and created approximately 400 cyanotypes. And then they are now published in a book, so you can, the entire collection of his cyanotypes. And this is Trumpelow County, or Trumpelow, Wisconsin, which is right near the Black River Falls, where the Ho-Chunk headquarters is now. the tribal headquarters. And I want to mention too that Trumpeneau County is where my farm is in Wisconsin. So we're surrounded by Ho-Chunk territory where I have my home, where I raise my children. So I wanted to show some detail of the canoe. Truman reinterpreted his mother's basket-making techniques. Instead of using black ash, which he did use at times for a number of his works, he used willow, which is important because not only was he reinterpreting the basket-making techniques of his family, but he was developing his own aesthetic and also, as I mentioned, reflecting back to bent willow, bent wooden strips that are used for a number of reasons by various indigenous communities. But I also love the play of shadow and light that he often relates to in his work, and I think that's part of what adds to the wood's curvature and a sense of viscosity in his works that reflects this sense of water or movement, although he's using wood. I wanted to show this example from the Chazen Museum, which is on the University of Wisconsin campus, because the canoe is a significant image for Truman, and he often reflects back to the canoe again and again, whether he's working in bronze or other materials or willow. He reflects back to this moment where he was in a canoe with his family on one of the rivers in Wisconsin, and he tells Joe Ortel, his biographer, that he had this sensation that he was flying or hovering above the water as they floated along. And so this moment is significant for him, and it relates to a lot of his work at that confluence that I mentioned, that's part of the title of this talk, that confluence of history and myth. And I love that idea of something that is both real and imaginative, and that's where his work, it's in that space. I love his use of line, shadow, all of these qualities that are so important to his presentation. The bending of wood is actually part of the Ho-Chunk as well as other Northeastern and Midwestern indigenous communities. And so I want to tell this quick story about the Art of Native America exhibition at the Met. When I first joined the Met, I'm sure many of you have heard about the Charles and Valerie Dyker collection. Charles and Valerie Dyker are premier collectors of Native American art. Their collection is quite significant. And in 2018, they promised 91 works to the Met. And an entire exhibition or permanent installation has now been created around the Dyker collection, and it's on view, and you can go there, and it rotates every year. And when I first joined the Met, I walked into that specific gallery space, and there was a map on the wall. It was a standard map that we're all familiar with, two-dimensional, that delineated where all of the tribes who were represented in the exhibition were from. And so you would have, Haudenosaunee or Iroquois communities, in the Northeast. You would have Pueblo in the Southwest. So it was very delineated, very organized. And I said to my colleagues, one of the very first things was, this map has to go. And they were kind of baffled by that. And I said, well, this map doesn't show seasonal migration, and it doesn't show intercultural connections. It doesn't show relationships to water or shifting landscapes, all of these things that are so important to indigenous communities and their sense of responsibility and stewardship to their home place, their sense of kinship to their home place. And I said, if we're gonna have a map, we'll have an indigenous map. And so this is a photograph of a trail marker tree by the Ho-Chunk photographer Tom Jones that was included in the Water Memories exhibition. And I love this because it is an actual navigational tool, much like Truman's bird effigy. So the bending of young trees or saplings is very important as a navigational device or tool. When a tree, particular trees, specifically hardwood trees, are young, they'll be bent using the weight of rocks or other heavy materials, and then the tree will grow up naturally toward the light. And so it gets that particular bend in the tree, and then that bend signifies where there's fresh water sources. And so throughout the exhibition, the Water Memories exhibition that included Truman's work, we not only had direct references or representations of water, we also had very unexpected representations of water, including this trail marker tree, which pointed to a natural spring in Wisconsin. I also love the fact that this photograph was taken in the winter and that there's snow on the tree, another representation of water. And for many indigenous communities, water in all of its forms, as snow, as moving rivers or streams or lakes, raindrops, snowflakes, all of these things, as clouds, as lightning, these are considered sacred images, and you'll often see them on regalia or referenced in other ways aesthetically. So I really love this image. I love that it's a map. I love that it's a navigational tool, and so I felt like for the first time we had an indigenous map in the Native American Gallery. So on that trip in Madison, Wisconsin, we were celebrating Truman and his work. I had the honor of accompanying a Ho-Chunk elder to a site where one of Truman's site-specific works called Chapotake. And Chapotake is located where, again, two significant bodies of water converge. So the Turtle Creek and the Rock River, which are both located both in Beloit, Wisconsin, and Beloit, I think it's southern Beloit, Illinois. And at this place was ancestral Ho-Chunk village called Ketchuk, and otherwise known as Turtle Village. And between 1822 and 1832, Ketchuk included 35 lodges that were similar in construction to this, although they would have been covered in bark to create this round dwelling. And there were over 700 Ho-Chunk people who lived at this site. Chapotake actually means round-shaped house or dwelling. And this is the label for Chapotake, but what's important to Chapotake is that where Truman, the location that he chose to construct this, and also true to his aesthetic once again. As my professor, I remember him saying to me, "Don't be afraid to let the hardware show." And so what he meant by that is don't be afraid to show where things come together, those confluences, those convergences. It's okay to show, leather strips or copper wire or all these things that are holding materials together. But he also was very particular, but do it beautifully and do it well. I remember one time he came to my studio when I was a graduate student, and I had done something very haphazardly using dogwood branches, and they were kind of breaking in spots, and he kind of scolded me and said, no, you have to redo all this. So although he was very supportive and gentle in nature, he was also very particular and insisted that things had to be done very beautifully and done well. So this is just looking toward Chapotake, and I love that it's located under this cottonwood tree. And as many of you know, cottonwoods typically grow, they like their feet wet, and just like the black ash tree, so they like their feet wet, so they tend to grow where there's water. So when you're looking for water, you will look for a cottonwood tree. Specifically in the Southwest, it's a signal that there's water nearby. And these are shots of the natural surroundings. This area had actually been a dumping ground, an industrial waste dumping ground. And then it was brought back to life through community volunteers and other people who wanted to clean it up and recreate this beautiful space for the local community. And I love that they chose to have a Ho-Chunk artist create a site-specific work for this very special place. Oh, I wanted to mention too that the branches on the right are the type of willow that Truman would work with. Other natural surroundings at Chapultepec. So I mentioned that this is where the Turtle Creek and the Rock River, the confluence of the two significant water sites, come together. Can you hear the water? Oh, good. So sound was also very important to Truman's works, and that's part of our natural surroundings, and sound is important to all of us. And so in 2022, we had a program, The Sound of Healing Native American Art, Music, and Dance During Pandemics, to explore the idea of sound as a healing. And we focused specifically on jingle dresses, which are an Anishinaabe tradition. The story behind the jingle dance dresses is that a young girl had a dream. It was during a time of a pandemic, during the flu pandemic, I think it was in 1918, and a number of Native communities were being wiped out by the pandemic. And this Anishinaabe girl had a dream that if she created this dress that could make sound, she could then heal her community. And so the dress itself is considered a prayer. The sound that it makes, the swishing of the jingles, is considered a prayer for community members. And it's now danced with other communities as well. It's now been taken on at powwows. It's now considered a social dance. But we invited a group of jingle dress dancers to come to the Met. It was the first time that we had a group of jingle dress dancers come in. It was just after the pandemic, and we had a pretty good crowd, and people were very interested in learning about how sound can be a source of healing. And just like we heard with the Chapultepec, the water, the trickling water at Chapultepec, but also the trickling water of the medicine spring. We all know, and especially here in this incredibly beautiful landscape, that the sounds of the birds, the trees, all of these things, the water, are healing and nourishing for us. This was a really special program. It included Brenda Child from the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities, who's the premier jingle dance dress scholar here in the US. And her daughter dances the jingle dress, but also Robbie Robertson. And I know many of you are aware of Robbie Robertson's work. And he also just did the soundtrack for the new Martin Scorsese film that everyone's talking about, that's been nominated for many awards. But this was actually Robbie Robertson's last public appearance before his passing last year. So we had a really great conversation with Brenda Child and Robbie Robertson, and Robbie talked about healing, music and sound as healing for him as he was growing up, and as he composed many of his songs. And these are some of the dancers and the singers and drummers who came to the Met. As part of the Water Memories exhibition, we included local New York City urban Indian community members. We invited indigenous people from all across the city to join us at the Met to create these mirror shields that you see at the top from the Chinumpa Hanska Luger video performance that he did at Standing Rock. And just a little background about these mirror shields: they were used by water protectors during the Standing Rock protest, and they were used to protect the bodies of the water protectors. Not only did they reflect back to the armed police their violent actions toward the water protectors, they were used to protect their entire bodies. And Chinoopa had this idea, he came up with this idea because he was influenced by Ukrainian women who were protesting against armed police, who had held up hand mirrors to armed police to protect themselves and their children. And Chinoopa decided he wanted to create something similar, but he wanted to use materials that would not be harmful or become projectiles on the water protectors. And so he decided to use this pressed board and then also this reflective mylar on the shields. So we wanted to include some of the shields in the Water Memories exhibition, but what we didn't want was to appropriate or aestheticize mirror shields that had been actually used at Standing Rock. We didn't feel good about that as a staff. We felt like if we're going to have these in the gallery space, then we should invite community members in, work together, and create something that's meant for the exhibition. And so we had a number of Indigenous community members from across New York come into the city, come in, and we all worked together to create the mirror shield entrance to the Water Memories exhibition. So when you came into the exhibition, into Water Memories, you enter through, if you've ever been to the American Wing, through this very elaborate and posh neoclassical gallery space that's all white marble and silver. It's very extravagant. And then you enter through that space to get to our Native American exhibitions in our gallery. And so we covered the entrance of Water Memories with these reflective shields so that when visitors came into the exhibition, the first thing they saw was themselves. And then they realized their role in protecting freshwater sources. And you can see Truman's canoe in that shot that I just showed. And then one of my favorite things to do, and we were talking about this at lunch, is to place Native American and non-Native artworks in dialogue. And in this part of the exhibition, we had the work of younger up-and-coming artists, including Courtney Leonard, who is a Shinnecock ceramicist, in dialogue with the waterscapes of William Merritt Chase. But also we had the work, a triptych, one of the very, very rare depictions of water by Fritz Scholder, who is German-American and Luiseno Indian, who was very popular during the 60s and 70s. And then also their work in dialogue with Arthur Dove. So there are all these representations of water in conversation with one another. So I'm going to move into our current exhibition, which is the Grounded in Clay exhibition that's currently on view at the Met. Water Memories focused on water, and Grounded in Clay focused on the earth. And so this was a collaborative project that involved over 60 community curators from the Southwest, primarily from New Mexico, but also Texas and Arizona. They were from 21 different Pueblo Indian communities. And I want to tell the story about when the pots first arrived at the museum. So we wanted to make sure we did everything in consultation with the community members. And one of the things that we asked about was, how do we welcome the pots when they come in? So one of the things that we learned very quickly as a staff was that the pots were viewed not as objects. And if you work in museum, you learn quickly that items that you have on view are often referred to objects. That's the standard museum language. Instead, the pots were talked about by the community members as ancestors, as being alive, as embodying energy and embodying spirit, which makes sense, right? Because they're made out of the earth and they're made by human hands. In fact, when community members talked about the pots, they even described them in very human-like terms. They described the neck of the pot. They describe the mouth of the pot where it's opening. They also describe the shoulders, the belly, and the feet of the pot. And so there's this very human-like description of the pots. So when we wanted to make sure to welcome them appropriately, and so on the morning that they arrived, it was very early last June in the morning. The sun was rising, and 2 semi-trucks arrived at the Met's loading dock. And when they pulled in, instead of, throwing the doors open on the semis, which we typically do, and then haul out these big, massive crates of artworks, we were told to invite community members to come, and then they would open one of the doors a little bit and then welcome the pots. And so that's what we did. And we all gathered together at the loading dock that morning, and 2 community members came, and we did exactly what they said. Only one of the doors was open just a little bit, and then the 2 community members went up to the back of the truck and were whispering to the pots. And what they were saying exactly, I don't know, but what I understand is they were telling the pots that you're safe here, that it's okay to be here and that you're in good hands. And then they said prayers and blessings for all of the pots to be there at the Met. We also had a blessing ceremony in the gallery space where the pots are now on view, because that's where they would be for the next year. And so it was this really significant moment, especially as an Indigenous person, but also as a curator, because I realized at that moment that things were shifting at the Met, that the team had grown, and that the team was open now to new ways of presenting art appropriately and respectfully and according to Indigenous perspectives. So it was this really special time. So a little bit about Grounded in Clay. It is the first community-curated Native American exhibition at the Met in 153 years. Over 60 Pueblo community members, known as the Pueblo Pottery Collective, curated 100 historically and culturally significant works, and they contributed to in-gallery labels and the exhibition catalog. The exhibition foregrounds the voices, perspectives, personal stories of Pueblo community members from 19 Rio Grande Pueblos and also Isleta del Sur and Hopi communities, so altogether 21 Pueblo communities. And co-curators included professionals from the School for Advanced Research in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and also the Vilchuk Foundation and the Met. Then in July, we had an opening celebration, and over 400 people showed up to that celebration. It was really quite remarkable. It was packed, and for the first time, we had a Indigenous banner on the front of the Met. So when the Diker exhibition opened in 2018, there was a banner that said the Charles and Valerie Diker collection on the front of the museum, but what I had shared with my colleagues was that banner, the Diker banner, honored the Dikers. It didn't honor the Pueblo or the Native American community members. So we wanted to honor the Pueblo communities. And so this was, in my mind, this is the first Native American banner on the front of the Met. And so I'm really proud of that. And then also we invited every Pueblo community curator who was involved with the exhibition, but also anyone who had contributed to the exhibition in some way was invited. And I love this photograph because it's all of the Pueblo people who had contributed to the project in one way or another. And it was a very proud moment for them. Some other initiatives that we have in the Met related to Native Perspectives is our Native Perspectives project. This is an ongoing project where we invite Indigenous curators and community members, scholars, to offer their thoughts about works in the Met's collection that are on view. I love this particular write-up by Dr. Gabriela Spears-Rico. She is Purépecha, like me, and so I think it's probably the first Purépecha, well, besides my labels, Purépecha person to write a label for a sculpture. And so it's a really interesting project. We're now in our 3rd generation of Native Perspectives project, and so we'll be going into another one next year. We also work closely with communities in regard to NAGPRA regulations, NAGPRA processes. At the Met, we have approximately 5,000 works that are related to Native American communities. And so I know you hear a lot about in the news about what different museums are doing in regard to the NAGPRA process, and also with the current new regulations that were put in place in January, and just how complicated this process has become. Part of the NAGPRA process is to provide updated collection summaries to communities. And so what you do is you create inventories of the works that you have that relate to particular nations or tribes, and then you send those lists to the communities, and then they get back to you with some type of claim or no claim, but it's the responsibility of a museum to reach out to communities to let them know what they have in their collection, so that communities are aware what's there or what might be placed on view. And now with the new regulations, you have to get community consent. They have to be involved in some way and know what you're placing on view. So it's become even more in-depth process. It takes a lot of time. The repatriation process takes years. It's a reciprocal relationship. And I know right now in the news you might be hearing a lot or seeing a lot of articles about museums holding on to things, or they're not giving things back, or all of this. And when I read articles like that, it's a clear signal to me that whoever wrote the article doesn't work in museums and has never worked with NAGPRA, and doesn't realize that the deaccession and repatriation process is very extensive. It's a federal law. It was passed in the 1990s, and recently new regs were passed, or it was amended, and so it's a very intricate process, and it's also one of respect and collaboration, so it takes considerable time. In my role as the curator of Native American art at the Met, I do, when there's a moment that I feel that I must stand up and speak out about a particular issue, I do that. I'm very selective about that. Most of the time, I take a back seat and foreground the voices and perspectives of community members. I have often told my colleagues that it's not about me. It's about the communities. And when I first started at the Met, I often, people would say, well, you're the expert, you're the Native art expert. And I had to keep telling people, I'm not the expert, the communities are the expert, and we will defer to them. And so this was a new way of thinking about art. It was also a new way for the Met to think about curation. But for me, it was the natural way to do that in a respectful way. Even when you're a member of a community or a tribal member, you really cannot speak for the community unless you're someone who is appointed to do so, or you're from a particular clan or lineage where you can do that. And so to think that someone can just stand up and speak for a community, it's a very sensitive, it's a very sensitive idea, and there's a lot of protocols that are involved. So I do not speak for other Native people. Instead, I really see my role as a facilitator in helping other Indigenous people get their voice out, their perspectives out about the artwork. So I want to share just a little about our upcoming project that will be starting in July. We will be featuring the personality prints or triptychs of Mary Sully. The exhibition will be called Mary Sully Native Modern, and it'll be on view this July until next January. So Mary Sully was a Yankton Dakota or Osheti-Sakoan woman who has a very complex background. She is the great-granddaughter of Thomas Sully. So if any of you are familiar with the very famous 19th century portraitist Thomas Sully, at the Met we have his very well-known portrait of Queen Victoria in our collection in the American wing. And Thomas so there's Thomas Sully, then there's Alfred Sully, who is her grandfather, and then her father. So that's on her Sully side. And then on her mother's side, her mother was Behan de Dutwin, who was a Dakota woman and is part of the Deloria family. So if any of you are familiar with Dakota history and culture, the Delorias are a very prominent Dakota family. Vine Deloria wrote the book God is Red. Phil Deloria is a renowned historian who's a professor at Harvard University. So they're a very highly respected Dakota family. And Mary Sully comes from both of those families. In the 1920s and 30s, Mary Sully created a series of triptychs, or personality prints, and these are works that are separated into 3 segments. They're organized with the top with some type of representational or pattern-like image. That then is further abstracted in the middle panel, and then it's fully abstracted into her own interpretation on the bottom panel that depicts typically some type of reference or Dakota sensibilities in regard to aesthetics. As you can see, the one on the left is a reference to Gertrude Stein's "A rose is a rose is a rose," and then she takes the rose imagery, abstracts it even smaller, creating that type of graphic print, and then it becomes a Dakota, a stylized Dakota design. Up here, Eugene Field, who was a well-known children's author. I think he wrote Little Boy Blue, and then I can't remember the other children's texts that he wrote. So you see the celebration of children at the top. What you're looking at in the middle panel, which is hard to see from where you're all sitting, is the tops of the heads of the children, along with the bells that are, so you can see the bells, and then you're looking down at the tops of the heads of the children. And then at the bottom, she has a Dakota child in a traditional cradle board. So the story behind these triptychs is that they were locked away in a suitcase for decades under the stairs in the Deloria family. And one day, Phil Deloria's mother said to him, "Oh, we have this suitcase of drawings that you might be interested in." And he opened up the suitcase and found hundreds of these works. So Mary Sully was actually sort of a recluse. She lived around New York City with her sister Ella Deloria, who's also a well-known author and also an anthropologist. Ella worked with Franz Boas at Columbia University, and the two sisters lived together. They lived around New York. They also lived in Colorado, in the Dakotas, other places, and they had somewhat of a transient life. They struggled financially, and so that's why a number of Mary Sully's works are created with what we might call mid-grade stock paper. It's the type of manila rough paper that we often used in elementary school to create drawings on, that your teacher may have handed out for people to draw on. She also used colored pencil and also water-based paints, and then some marker. And these materials are all clues to the fact that they were financially struggling, but also, these materials are lightweight, they can be carried around, and they're easily accessible to someone who might not be able to afford oil paints like her great-grandfather Thomas Sully could. So Mary Sully did spend time, she was born on the Standing Rock Indian Reservation in 1896, and she moved around quite a bit. She also made money by dressing up in what would be a pseudo-Dakota outfit, and then allowing filmmakers and other people to tape her or make films of her as she was making her drawings. And so you can actually go online and look on YouTube, and there's videos of Mary Sully while she's creating work. And then also she spent time in a boarding school and had a number of experiences there. There is a book about her life and work. She had a love of politics, of literature, of the opera, of celebrity life. Much like her great-grandfather Thomas Sully, he too enjoyed depicting famous people like Queen Victoria in her youth. And she is also what we might describe today as neurodivergent. And so Mary Sully was a bit of a recluse. She often stayed in her room on her own, and her only contact with the outside world were Life magazines, maybe going to movies with her sister Ella, and maybe going to a show. But for the most part, she stayed in her room and drew hundreds and hundreds of these drawings that were locked away for decades. And recently, they were uncovered or recovered by Phil Deloria, and we acquired 13 of them for the Met, and we'll be showing 30 of them in our upcoming exhibition. I'm super excited about that. We are going to be presenting her work as someone who is neurodivergent, who thinks visually, thinks in patterns. I don't know if many of you are familiar with the new Temple Grandin book, Visual Thinking, which talks about how visual thinkers are very different in their thought process from linear thinkers who think through time, who think along, a linear process. Visual thinkers think in patterns and designs and often can catch things visually that other people can't. And so we'll be talking about Mary's work in that context as well. And so that's really all that I had to share with you today, and thank you for listening. Sure. I figured it was time to start talking. I could see people fidgeting in their chairs. Now I know wooden chairs, right? It's okay, go ahead.
This may seem like a trivial observation, but back with the dome, the dwelling, right, in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
What struck me was because of the very wonderful discussion that you had about the convergence of water, the substance on the ground below it looked like seashells,
Oh.
And I didn't know whether that was intentional, but it just struck me.
I think that's rock, or I don't think it's bark chips, but I think it's like some kind of a rough, very rough gravel.
From the riverbed is my point.
I don't know. That's a good question.
That's why I said this is a pretty kind of observation, but it hit me. Because all the other pieces fit together, and so I thought, maybe the curator of that display was thinking, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
Struck me, but
Yeah, that's a great point.
I have one other little question.
Sure.
Spears, the quotation from the citation about the Mexican girl dying.
Yeah.
There is a museum curator in Rhode Island whose surname is Spears, and I don't know whether that's a name that is common in Native communities in certain.
I don't think so. That's actually her husband's name, and he's Ojibwe. So that's part of the Red Lake Ojibwe. Yeah. I think her name is hyphenated, and I think she took Spears as part of her last name. Yeah.
Can you talk a little about the designs on the jingle dress?
Yeah, those are cones. So those little metal jingles are, oops, yeah. So oftentimes, I like to say Native people were like the first recyclers. And when cones or jingles were first being made, oftentimes tobacco tins and other types of tins were cut and then used to make the cones. And for this particular dress, those are actually vintage cones that had been passed down intergenerationally. And this dress that you're looking at belonged to the daughter of Brenda Child, who was in the other image sitting with me and with Robbie Robertson. That was her daughter's jingle dress that she had made, and they loaned it to us for the exhibition. We had several jingle dresses on view, and those jingles had been passed down from, I believe, Brenda's grandmother, and then Brenda had them when she was a young woman, and now her daughter, this is her daughter's dress. So the jingles themselves are actually, you know, considered almost what we might consider heirloom type items that are passed down from generation to generation. And they're often made out of any number of metal, very light metal materials. You can now buy them. You can order them online, but I really love the vintage ones. And some dancers and families even left like the original tobacco can paint on them, and so they have like, you know, the original paint and designs from the different cans or coffee cans or whatever they used, and I think that's really cool. I love seeing that type of repurposing. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say I'm deeply appreciative and horrified that it took 153 years, and appreciative that you're being received as, and you redirected people, you're being received as a person as this phenomenal academic and professional background, and that you are doing it in the community for people of Indigenous backgrounds, not as, because I think that it's just a very horrible position to ever put you in, and I'm grateful that you have that support, and you see it shifting, because it's, you know, asking people to give permission to utilize their works just seems so normal, but yet it's been such a non-way that we've worked in this country for so long, that I just want to thank you for all the fighting and all the energy you've had to put forward to move and shift that. It's just beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. I appreciate your words. I'm sitting here behind you as one of my best friends, and she and I were just talking about how tough my job can be the other day, and I was, you get in those days where you just have a really rough day. I was like, did she bring you? But it is a challenging position. Thank you. Oftentimes you're kind of caught in the middle of what an institution, and their policies and how they operate, how they've operated for hundreds of years, and then, this new way of going about exhibitions and programming. But when I joined the Met, I made the promise, and this is actually stated on our gallery wall where we once had that map that I had removed. Instead, we have an active land and water statement. And I say statement, not acknowledgement, and I'll explain why. But the statement, it's very, very open about everything we do relevant to Native American art and its presentation, programs, care, collections, care, everything will be in consultation with communities moving forward. And I've maintained that promise, and I also hold my colleagues to that promise, and I feel like this is what we have to do. This is the responsibility that we have. And also, when a museum decides to start taking in Native American collections, you take on that responsibility. It's not, oh, this is a beautiful, cradle board, I'm just gonna have it in my museum. No, you take on that responsibility of caring for it in an appropriate and respectful way, working with communities. So I really appreciate your words, thank you. There was something else I was gonna say about that, but I forgot what, I don't know, if anyone remembers, you can remind me. Oh, oftentimes I'm asked about land acknowledgements, and I say, my perspective, I have 2 points on that, or 2 thoughts, and the first one is, I do believe that land acknowledgements are not for Indigenous people to give. They're for settler communities to give. I don't give land acknowledgements when I speak, but I do acknowledge myself as a visitor because my ancestors come from another place, another region, and so I want to show my respect to other Native people. But also, I really see land acknowledgements as a first step, and I liken it to recovery, the 12 steps. So if any of you know about that, the first step of recovery is what? Admitting the problem. That's how I see a land acknowledgement. You are, as a settler community, acknowledging we have a problem here, and we acknowledge that, and now where do we go from here? That's basically how I see it, and then you move from there. In the back. Yeah.
At the beginning with the bird sculpture,
Bird effigy.
it was almost a black comedy moment, the combination of the bird sculpture by a Native American on a golf course.
Yeah.
With ceremonial mounds incorporated into the golf course. Who preceded there? Was the sculpture, and the mounds were there obviously before.
Yeah.
But was the sculpture there before the golf course? Was it commissioned as part of the golf course?
No. So the date on these mounds is much earlier than the golf course, so it's hard to read on this. But can someone see that? Yeah, it's like, yeah, 600 AD to 1500 AD.
Obviously the mounds are older.
Yeah.
The sculpture itself.
Oh, there, that one. The effigy bird form, this one.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's on the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus.
Okay.
And then
That's
it's,
not part of the golf course.
no, it's on the campus, which actually it's a land grant campus. And that actually was also the homelands of the Ho-Chunk people, their ancestors.
Right.
And there are mounds on the Madison campus. But what I was, how I was relating that to the other mounds was that this bird, this mound form or effigy mound, points to that grouping of mounds on the golf course. And then those mounds are directionally related to that medicine spring that I showed. And so I was talking about not only is the aesthetic form of the work significant because it relates back intergenerationally and aesthetically, but also that they point to specific sacred sites. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. And you know when they built that golf course?
1921. Yeah.
Because that would be, it's a sacrilege to build that golf course around the ceremonial land.
There was actually a golf course in another region, and I'm forgetting where it is, that has mounds. And only this past year, I think it was made into a World Heritage Site because of the mounds. And I'm forgetting where that is. Is it Ohio or Iowa? And so I really hope someone takes on that initiative. I would love to do that. I just don't have the time to take that on. But it's really important to save these places, the mounds. Any other questions or thoughts? Sure.
What do the mounds actually represent?
They're so ancient or old, ancestral that the tough part is so many of them have been excavated and items removed, and that's why we have laws like NAGPRA, because mounds and other burial sites were excavated and then pots and other things were taken, and then now you see a lot of those items in museums, and that's one of the main issues of NAGPRA.
Truman's canoe.
Yeah.
Did you say that the museum acquired that?
Yes.
Where is it now?
So that is now in storage. Yeah, but for this exhibition, it'll be here. You have Truman's it's a waterfall sculpture, and it's mounted to the wall, and then it comes down like a stream. And, you know, like I said earlier, the type of woods that he uses, but also the way that he works with the wood following the natural grain, he, you know, really leaves the wood in many times, although he might form it into strips, he leaves it according to its natural grain, which I think gives that viscosity, that quality of it flowing and falling, and that water-like quality. So it's really quite something to see his large-scale works in person. Sure. Hi.
Did he display it before it was acquired by the museum, and if so, how was it previously displayed?
The canoe? So the canoes actually are so lightweight, and that canoe is about maybe 7 feet long and then maybe about 3 feet wide, 2 or 3 feet wide. And he constructed the canoes in such a way that they can either be suspended or mounted to a wall or shown on a base, on a platform, or a deck. And so he did a number of works that use that loosely woven basket type method. Some of them are canoe shaped, some of them are the Chapotake dwelling, the turtle dwelling. He turned them upside down, and then he hung feathers from them, and they're really beautiful vessels that just look like they would float on the water or float in the sky. So he was very interested in vessels and forms that either could fly in the sky or hover, but they're always carrying something, and a lot of times he used feathers to line them, and so it creates like this soft, downy lining inside of the vessels. They're really quite beautiful, very ethereal. One more question, or any? Sure. I didn't, no, not yet. Did you want me to see something in particular? No, I didn't get a chance, unfortunately. Was that the native performance? Yeah. Was it focused on native performance? Yeah, I didn't get a chance to see that, unfortunately. You know, it's funny, you know, at the Met is 4 city blocks long. And so when you're in the museum and you're working on your work, oftentimes you're in your office or you go down to the gallery to check on things, make sure everything's okay. I have colleagues across the museum who have exhibits that I still haven't even seen because I'm busy over here, and their show's way over there. So it almost takes like you have to block out time on your schedule just to get across the museum to go see your colleagues' shows. It's quite something. Yeah. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.